we talked about the law of demand, and we said that the law of demand is the inverse relationship between quantity demanded and the price of a commodity when everything else in the market stays constant. And we also said that the graphical representation of this law of demand in a two-dimensional price and quantity space is the demand curve. Now let us see how we can move from individual demand curve to the market demand curve, or in other words, how do we really derive the market demand curve. Now let us write down a relationship. Let's say we had two buyers, Joe and John. Okay, let's just say we have three buyers, Joe, John and Jack. So these are the three buyers, and we have the commodity ice creams. So that is the market that we are really concerned about, and we have three price points in the market. So this is basically the own price that I am talking about, say $2, $5 and $7. So all these three buyers face these three prices in the market, right? Let's call this price P1, let's call this P2, and let's call this P3, right? So that means if the initial, and let's say the initial price is P1, and then we have two other price points, P2 and P3. So when the movement is from P1 to P2, you can clearly see that we are talking about a decrease in price. When the movement is from P1 to P3, we are clearly talking about an increase in price. Now at these three price points, let us see what is the quantity demanded by these three buyers. Now, although the market price is the same, depending on the willingness to buy, every buyer will have a different quantity demanded. Not all of us want the same quantity even if we face the same price, right? For example, if the price of this pen is $2, at price $2, I might be willing to buy 3 of these pens, whereas you might be willing to buy 5 of these pens and someone else might be willing to buy just 1. Right? So even as buyers, even though we face the same price, we might have very different willingness to buy at those price points, and hence we may have different quantity demanded, right? So let's say for Joe, when the price is $5, Joe wants to buy let's say 6 ice creams. Okay, when the price is $5, John wants to buy 4 ice creams, and when the price is $5, Jack wants to buy, let's say, 3 ice creams. Okay, now let us assume that there has been a decrease in price. So the price has gone down to $2. Now if law of demand holds for all these 3 buyers, then please understand that as price drops, the buyers, all these 3 buyers individually should be willing to buy more of the commodity, right? So let's say now Joe wants to buy 8 and John wants to buy 6 and Jack wants to buy 5. Because the price has dropped. Once again, assuming that the law of demand holds, if the price goes up from $5 to $7, then these 3 consumers, these 3 buyers individually should be willing to buy less than what they were buying at $5, assuming that the law of demand holds for them, which means Joe should be willing to buy something less than 6, maybe 4. John should be willing to buy something less than 4, maybe 2, and Jack should be willing to buy something less than 3, that is maybe 1, right? So now if we draw the individual demand curves, if I wanted to draw the individual demand curve for Joe for ice cream, let's say if I wanted to draw Joe's demand curve and I have his quantity demanded on the x-axis, always quantity goes on the x-axis and the own price of the commodity ice creams on the y-axis, and I had these three price points, $2, $7, $5 and $2. If I had these price points and I try to plot the quantity demanded for Joe, then for $5 his quantity demanded is 6. For $2 his quantity demanded is 8, and for $7 his quantity demanded is 4, right? And if I join these price and quantity relationship points, then I end up getting the demand curve, which I am calling the D curve, and this is the individual demand curve for Joe. Now similarly, I could draw a demand curve for John and I could draw a demand curve for Jack. Please note, and you can try to do them on your own, I am not putting them on the board, but if you draw them, you will see that you will get very different price and quantity relationships depending on what combinations you have for each individual. But the similarity is that you will end up getting a downward sloping line for all those three buyers, which basically means that the law of demand holds for all these three individuals, or in other words, the individual demand curves are downward sloping and they all follow the law of demand. But what I am really interested in is to get the market demand curve. How do I get the market demand curve? The market demand curve is obtained by horizontal summation of individual demand curves or individual quantity demanded. Now how do I get that? Let's say now I want to draw the market demand curve. So still I have quantity demanded on the x-axis. I have the own price of the commodity ice creams, and I still have the three price points in the market, that is $7, which I called P3, $5, which we had called P1, and $2, which we had called P2. Now please note that at $5, if I horizontally sum up the demands of all three individual buyers, what I really get is 6 plus 4 plus 3, that is 7 plus 6, which comes up to 13. That means at $5 the quantity demanded in the market by all buyers of ice cream is 13. So Joe, Jack and John together demand 13 ice creams at the price $5. Now if I look at the price point $2, then at price point $2, Joe, John and Jack together they demand 8 plus 6 plus 5, which is a total of 19 ice creams. So at $2, all buyers of ice creams demand 19 total ice creams. And if I look at another price point, which is $7, at $7 these three buyers buy 4 plus 2 plus 1, which is 7 ice creams. So at $7 all buyers of ice creams in this market together demand 7 ice creams. All I am doing is I am horizontally summing up the quantity demanded of the individual buyers at every price point. And if I join a line through all those price and quantity demanded relationships, then I still end up getting that downward sloping demand curve. But please note that I am not able to identify this demand curve to one particular individual. I couldn't say this is Joe's or this is Jack's or this is John's, because I have added up all their quantity demanded under this demand curve. So what I really get here is the market demand curve. But what is interesting to note is that the market demand curve looks very similar to the individual demand curve. That means the law of demand not only holds at the individual level, but it also holds at the level of the market. The law of demand, the inverse relationship between quantity demanded and price, given the ceteris paribus condition, is true at the individual level, and it is also true at the level of the market. And the way that you would derive the market demand curve is through a horizontal summation of the individual demand curves.